A boy, so terrified of dogs he once couldn't even hear them bark, is now resting his hand on a golden retriever's back. He's reading a fairy tale aloud in a city park, while the same dog lies beside him, calm and still. But just weeks ago, that dog was found zipped inside a suitcase, soaked in rain, starving, left to die. Why would a boy who feared dogs choose to touch this one? Why would a dog, once abused, still wag his tail at strangers? And who was the woman that stopped her car and opened the suitcase no one else saw? Stay with us. This isn't just a story about a rescue dog. It's about second chances, quiet faith, and a miracle that came wrapped in fur. The storm had rolled in faster than the forecasts warned. By dusk, Portland's skies had darkened into a deep slate-gray bruise, and sheets of rain now lashed the city like a punishment. The bridge over the Willamette River had emptied, save for the occasional late commuter, their headlights blurred through rivulets of water. It was there, on that forgotten stretch of steel and concrete, that a man pulled over and exited his aging black sedan. He moved quickly, glancing over his shoulder as he hoisted a mud-streaked suitcase from the back seat. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore a navy hoodie pulled low, masking a stubbled jaw and a twisted frown. The man didn't look back. He carried the suitcase with both hands to the railing, where water dripped in torrents between the rusting bars. Then, with one final motion, he set it down just beside a storm drain, half shielded by a pile of wind-blown leaves and debris. A strip of red duct tape around the zipper glinted in the rain. He returned to the car, tires skidding briefly as he disappeared into the downpour. A dashcam from a parked semi-truck flickered silently nearby, capturing everything. A mile away, Harper Quinn the wheel of her beat-up Corolla with both hands. Her shift at the used bookstore had run late, again. The neon, "Quinn's Pages and Paws" sign had flickered apologetically as she locked the doors and braced for the drive home. Harper was 31, with hazel eyes that bore the subtle bruising of sleeplessness and solitude. She had once been luminous, laughing easily, voice full of questions, but that version of herself had dimmed after the loss of her sister to a rare autoimmune disease 3 years prior. Grief had settled on her slender frame like an old cardigan, familiar, shapeless, and impossible to shake off. Her dark hair, often pulled into a lazy bun, frizzed in the storm's humidity. Though she lived alone in a 2-story house on the east side, she shared her days with secondhand stories and a quiet yearning for connection she couldn't name. As she crossed the bridge, her headlights caught something unusual, a small mound tucked near the railing, shrouded in trash and vines. It wasn't moving, but something about it tugged at her. She rolled to a slow stop, flicked her hazards, and stepped into the cold. The rain hit her instantly, soaking through her jacket in seconds. Her boots sloshed as she approached. At first it looked like discarded luggage, an old suitcase, the kind airport staff would eye suspiciously. But as Harper reached down and brushed away the wet leaves, she froze. The tape had been wrapped tightly, sealing the zipper shut. And from somewhere inside, so faint it nearly disappeared into the wind, she heard it, a scratching, then again, slow, weak, deliberate. Her heart stumbled. Harper dropped to her knees, ignoring the icy water pooling around her. "Oh my God," she whispered, fingers trembling as she pressed her ear to the side. A whimper, barely audible, but it was there. Something, or someone, was trapped inside. Meanwhile, on Sycamore Lane, just a few blocks from Harper's house, Theo Madden stood frozen under the overhang of his porch, watching a golden retriever trot past with its owner on the sidewalk. The boy's thin frame was pressed tight against the doorframe, fists clenched so hard his knuckles had turned white. 11 years old, with sandy brown hair and oversized glasses slipping down his nose, Theo carried a quietness that often confused adults. Diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder at age 6, he found safety in routine, in quiet corners and sketchbooks. But it was dogs, especially large ones, that stirred panic he couldn't reason away. When he was 4, a neighbor's German shepherd had lunged through a screen door and bit his arm. The scar was long gone, but the fear had burrowed deep. Tonight, seeing that retriever pass, he could barely breathe. His mother, Michelle Madden, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with soft eyes and a nurse's gentle authority, opened the front door behind him. "Theo," she said gently, "come inside, honey. It's pouring." Theo nodded quickly but didn't move until the dog had completely vanished around the corner. Only then did he slip inside like a shadow, the screen door creaking shut behind him. He didn't know it yet, but something was shifting. A new presence was about to enter their quiet little street, one that would challenge every boundary he had set to keep himself safe. Back on the bridge, Harper scrambled to find her phone, but her fingers were shaking too badly. Her thoughts raced. What if she couldn't get it open in time? What if whatever was inside had already given up? She leaned into the suitcase, whispering through the tiny gap near the zipper. "It's okay. I'm going to get you out, I promise." The scratching had stopped, and the silence that followed chilled her more than the rain. She stood, hands fumbling at the tape, heart thudding wildly as thunder cracked overhead. Behind her, the truck's dashcam continued recording, the frame holding one soaked woman in the heart of a storm, hunched over what looked like nothing more than trash to a passing stranger. But Harper knew, in the deep and inexplicable way that some people do, that life was curled inside that box, and she was the one who had heard it. The rain hadn't let up. It thundered like 1,000 whispered fears as Harper drove home, her fingers clenched white around the steering wheel. The suitcase sat in the back seat, its red tape now fraying, soaked, defeated. She had managed to wedge a pair of scissors under the edge and tear it halfway open, just enough to glimpse what was inside. The sight haunted her. A golden retriever puppy, barely more than skin and bone, fur matted and slick with filth, had curled into the far corner of the suitcase like a forgotten sock. He hadn't barked, hadn't growled, hadn't even lifted his head. But his eyes had met hers through the crack, and she had seen something ancient, a sorrow that didn't belong in a creature so small. Inside her house, Harper rushed straight to the living room, ignoring the water she tracked across the floors. She laid the suitcase down on a clean towel she had flung across the rug earlier and reached in with trembling hands. The puppy didn't resist. He felt weightless, as if carrying him were no more difficult than lifting a bundle of wet towels. His fur, which might have been a honey gold under better circumstances, was darkened with grime and tangled into knots that pulled at his skin. His paws were raw at the pads, his belly sunken, and his breath came in ragged, shivering spurts. Harper moved instinctively, her nursing background resurfacing in waves, though it had been years since she left the clinical world for the quiet solitude of her bookstore. She laid the pup on a thick fleece blanket in front of her small stone fireplace, then ran to fetch more towels, her breath short, chest tight. By the time she returned, his eyes had closed, not in sleep, but in that resigned stillness that clings to animals on the edge. Harper dropped to her knees and began drying him with firm but careful strokes. "You're okay," she whispered, again and again. "You're safe now." The fire crackled, but it would take time to warm the room. She wrapped him in the towel, then in the fleece, pressing him against her chest like a child. His head lolled sideways, limp, but his heart still beat, a faint flutter beneath his ribs. For long minutes, Harper simply held him, rocking back and forth on the rug, the wind slapping the window panes. She thought about how easily she could have missed him. One more second of music playing, one glance at her phone, one turn of the wheel, and he'd still be out there, sealed in silence, disappearing. She looked down at him, brushed aside a clump of fur matted to his eye. "You need a name," she murmured. The puppy didn't stir. She thought of the suitcase, of the rain, of the look he'd given her. Bravery in silence, small courage. Her voice caught as she whispered, "Finley." The name felt right, delicate but strong. She repeated it softer, like a prayer, "Finley." Time slipped by as the firelight danced across the walls. Slowly she saw his ears twitch, then his nose flared slightly. He shifted just a little, curling deeper into the warmth of the towel. She hadn't cried yet, but now the tears came, silent, steady. Not just for him, for everything. For the 3 years she had lived without someone to care for. For the conversations that ended mid-sentence because there was no one left to finish them. For the silence that had filled her home and carved space into her heart. And now, this tiny broken thing had stumbled into her world, and suddenly there was a pulse in the quiet. The knock at the door startled her. She blinked, wiped her eyes, and gently laid Finley back onto the blanket, wrapping him tightly before hurrying to the entrance. Standing outside under a dripping umbrella was Michelle Madden, her neighbor, dressed in scrubs still damp from her shift at the local urgent care. She was in her early 40s, tall and sturdy, with graying hair pulled into a ponytail and kind but perpetually tired eyes. Her voice always held a tone of quiet command, the kind that nurses wore like armor. Michelle had the reputation of being both fiercely competent and cautiously kind, traits honed over years in triage rooms and late-night emergency calls. "Hey," Michelle said, stepping inside as Harper waved her in. "I saw your porch light on and thought I'd check in. Everything all right?" She paused, noticing the damp footprints and towels strewn across the floor. "Did something happen?" Harper hesitated, then gestured toward the living room. "I found a puppy." Her voice shook. "He was left in a suitcase, out by the bridge." Michelle blinked. She moved past Harper and into the glow of the fireplace. When she saw Finley, barely breathing, wrapped in damp fabric, her shoulders dropped. She knelt slowly, the nurse in her taking over. "Oh, baby," she breathed. "He's in bad shape." "I don't know how long he was out there," Harper said quietly, standing behind her. "But he's trying." Michelle reached out, pressing 2 fingers lightly to Finley's ribs, then gently opened his mouth to check his gums. "He's dehydrated. Weak, but not gone. You got him in just in time." She sat back on her heels, letting out a slow breath. "You did good, Harper." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire. Then Harper spoke. "How's Theo?" Michelle's brow furrowed, surprised by the change in subject. "He's managing. Still won't go near dogs, still shuts down when one passes by." She sighed. "We're trying, but it's hard." Harper nodded. Her mind was moving, slowly, deliberately. "Would you ever consider letting him meet Finley? When he's better, I mean." She caught Michelle's gaze, maybe just from a distance. Michelle's reaction was cautious. She stood, brushing her knees. "Harper, I appreciate what you're thinking, but Theo's fear, it runs deep. We've tried therapy, picture books, everything short of bringing a dog into our home. And I can't push him. Not yet." "I understand," Harper said softly. "But maybe Finley's different. He knows what it's like to be afraid too." Michelle looked down at the small bundle of fur again. Finley stirred slightly, and she exhaled. "Let's see how things go. One step at a time." She didn't promise, but she didn't say no either. Later, after Michelle left and the fire had dimmed to embers, Harper sat beside Finley once more. She had moved him to a small dog bed and added another blanket, her old college hoodie tucked in beside him to trap her scent. She watched his chest rise and fall, listened to the storm finally begin to quiet. Outside, Portland was slick and shimmering, the streetlights casting golden halos on the wet pavement. Inside, for the first time in a long time, the house did not feel empty. Harper whispered into the stillness, as if speaking to both Finley and herself. "We're going to get through this. You and me, little warrior." And in the faintest movement, the barest sound, she swore he gave a sigh, one of trust, or maybe surrender. She turned off the lights, leaving only the fireplace flickering behind her. By morning, the storm had loosened its grip on Portland, retreating into a cold drizzle that misted the sidewalks and blurred the windows of houses still blinking awake. The sky was the pale color of dishwater, a flat gray that dulled the trees and made the world feel quieter than usual. In Harper Quinn's home, however, silence was no longer the heavy, hollow thing it had once been. Now, it was delicate, held together by the rhythm of shallow breathing and the weight of a fragile hope cradled in a blanket on the kitchen floor. Harper had moved Finley there just before sunrise. The heat from the fireplace had begun to fade, and the kitchen, with its smooth tile floors and radiator along the baseboard, offered warmth and proximity to supplies. She'd layered towels over the floor and placed his bed, lined with her old hoodie and a soft wool blanket, near the fridge. The air was filled with the faint scent of chamomile and damp fur. Finley lay curled on his side, unmoving except for the occasional flutter beneath his ribs. His nose twitched sometimes, and his ears would flinch at certain sounds, but he had not lifted his head, not once. Harper sat cross-legged beside him, her knees drawn close, a mug of tea long gone cold in her hands. She hadn't slept. Her back ached, and her eyes stung from the dry burn of fatigue, but she didn't care. All night she had watched his chest rise and fall, terrified that it would stop. She counted his breaths like rosary beads, whispered encouragements under her breath, and occasionally reached out to brush a bit of fur away from his eyes. Around 3 a.m., she had tried offering him broth from a spoon, but he had only let a drop sit on his tongue before it slipped out again. Now, as morning crept in, she set the mug down and leaned forward. "Come on, baby boy," she whispered. "Just a little more." She dipped her fingers into the warm broth and let a few drops slide against his gums. He didn't react. Her throat tightened. "You've made it this far," she murmured. "Don't give up now." The moment came so suddenly she nearly missed it. As she leaned back to breathe, Finley's tail gave the smallest twitch, just once. Then again, slow, deliberate. Harper froze. Her hand shot to her mouth, stifling a gasp that broke into a sob. "Oh my God," she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "You're still in there." She reached for him, not to move him, not to shake him, but just to rest her hand on his chest, to feel the answer thumping beneath her palm. It was faint, but steady. Alive. Across the street, in the small white house with the cracked sidewalk, Theo Madden stared out of his bedroom window. The 11-year-old sat on a beanbag chair pulled close to the glass, his knees hugged tightly to his chest, a sketch pad balanced on one leg but ignored. His room was filled with quiet things. Books arranged by height, soft-colored posters of star charts and forest trails, and a nightlight that had been on since he was 5. Theo liked order, predictability. But this morning, something felt different. At school the day before, his class had been told they'd be taking a field trip next week to the local animal shelter. For empathy training, the teacher had said. Theo had frozen in his seat. When he told her he couldn't go, she had nodded politely, but he'd felt the shift in the room. Whispers, side glances, laughter that wasn't loud but sharp. One boy, Jeremy, had smirked and asked if Theo still thought all dogs had rabies. Another chimed in, bet he'd scream if a chihuahua barked. Theo had stared down at his pencil, his hands trembling so hard the lines of his drawing blurred. Now he watched the house across the street, eyes fixed on the kitchen window where a dim light glowed. Inside, he could just barely make out Harper's silhouette moving carefully across the room. She knelt often, leaned close to something just out of sight. He'd seen her carry it in 2 nights ago, a bundle wrapped in towels, a dog, small, golden, hurt, and still, she kept sitting beside it, talking to it, like it was a person. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't stop watching. Back in the kitchen, Harper had begun to talk more openly now, her voice soft and melodic. "You don't have to do anything, Finley," she said, stroking his ear. Just stay with me a little longer." She remembered the way her sister had breathed during the final days, shallow and uneven, but fiercely stubborn. The same way Finley did now, as if somewhere inside his battered frame, there was still a piece of him refusing to leave. Around mid-morning, Harper stepped away briefly to make a fresh cup of tea and reheat the broth. When she returned, she found Finley's eyes half open, unfocused but not empty. She knelt quickly, heart pounding. "Hi," she said, voice breaking into a laugh. "There you are." He didn't wag this time, but he blinked once, slow and deliberate. She tried the broth again, this time holding it to his lips in a small, shallow dish. When he didn't pull away, she dipped her finger and touched it gently to his tongue. This time he swallowed, just a drop, then another. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first step. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Theo sat up straighter as Harper opened her window just a crack, letting the smell of damp earth and healing steam waft into the air. She glanced across the street, and for the briefest moment, her eyes met Theo's. He didn't look away. Neither did she. Harper raised her hand in a small wave. Not a demand, just a hello. Theo hesitated. Then slowly, awkwardly, he lifted his hand and waved back. It was nothing. But it was everything. As evening drew near, Harper moved Finley's bed closer to the radiator and added another towel. She set a small nightlight near the floor, casting a soft golden glow. Then she lay down beside him, one hand resting gently on his side, feeling the warmth of his fragile pulse. His breathing was steadier now, and once or twice his paws twitched as if dreaming. She smiled through her exhaustion, the ache in her bones now a distant thing compared to the quiet joy blooming in her chest. "You're fighting," she whispered, "and I'm staying right here." Somewhere across the street, a boy watched a woman and her dog with a heart that felt less afraid than it did yesterday. It started with a sound so soft, Harper almost missed it. The tiny thump-thump of a tail brushing against fabric, hesitant and unsure, like the first heartbeat of a song not yet learned. Finley had eaten only a few spoonfuls of watered-down chicken broth earlier that morning, licking at the warm liquid from her fingers as if tasting hope for the first time. Now, in the filtered golden light of her living room, he lay bundled in soft blankets on a padded dog bed Harper had ordered the night before in a rare burst of optimism. And as she whispered her usual gentle praise, "Good boy, Finley, you're so strong, so brave," his tail flicked once again. Harper sat frozen for a second, hand still holding the spoon halfway to his mouth, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. Then she laughed, soft and shaky. "You're really in there, aren't you?" she whispered, brushing his ear lightly. "You hear me. You understand." She offered him another spoonful of mashed rice and broth, and this time he leaned his head forward, not far, just enough to meet her halfway. He was still thin, his ribs visible, fur dull and tangled in places, but there was a fire behind his eyes now, however faint. And his tail, that broken little metronome of life, continued to twitch each time her voice lifted, each time the words "good boy" touched the air. Harper didn't cry this time. She just smiled, rested her forehead lightly against his, and breathed out a thank you neither of them said aloud. Later that afternoon, Harper opened the back door for the first time since the rescue. The air was crisp and clean, a rare break in Portland's persistent damp. She stepped into the yard, which was modest, a patch of grass bordered by mossy bricks and a few potted herbs she always forgot to water, but to her it was a world. She laid a clean blanket on the deck and brought Finley out in her arms, wrapped like a sleeping infant. He lifted his head weakly, blinking against the light, and Harper sat beside him, letting him feel the sun on his fur, the wind on his whiskers. Across the street, Michelle Madden stood by her front gate, holding a reusable grocery bag in one hand and her son's shoulder in the other. Theo looked hesitant, his small frame leaning subtly away from the open space. He wore a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big, hood pulled tight, and stood half-shadowed behind his mother. His eyes, however, were fixed on Finley. "I thought maybe he could just see him," Harper said, rising slowly and walking toward the fence. "No touching, just looking." Michelle nodded, cautious. "He's been asking, quietly, but it's something." Her eyes scanned Harper's face for any sign of pressure, but there was none, only hope. Harper glanced at Theo, then crouched by Finley again. "This is Finley," she said aloud, though her voice was meant for the boy. "He's learning to trust again, too." Theo didn't respond, but he didn't run either. His eyes followed Finley's every move as Harper gently placed a hand on the pup's back. Finley blinked up at the boy, then with slow determination, his tail gave one brief wag. Theo's shoulders flinched, but not from fear, more like surprise. "Did he just wag?" he asked, his voice small but present. Harper looked up, smiling. "He did. He likes you already." Theo bit his lip, looking from his mother to Harper, then back to the dog. "He's not going to bark." "Not today," Harper said. "He's still learning how." Behind them, Michelle remained quiet. Her grip on the grocery bag tightened slightly, but her expression had softened. She had seen many types of healing in her years as a nurse, bones set straight, hearts shocked back to rhythm. But there was something different, more delicate, about this kind. A voice called out from the sidewalk. "Hey, Harper!" Turning, Harper saw a woman approaching with long strides and a purposeful expression. Her name was Nadia Reyes, a 40-something single mother and part-time yoga instructor who lived 2 doors down. Nadia was of Mexican descent, with sun-kissed skin, expressive eyebrows, and a warmth that often camouflaged her fierce protectiveness. She wore leggings, a paint-splattered sweatshirt, and carried a canvas bag slung over one shoulder filled with half-wrapped gifts for a fundraiser. "You're the talk of the block," Nadia said with a grin, eyeing the golden bundle on the deck. "Somebody said you rescued a dog from a suitcase during a rainstorm. Are you secretly an Avenger?" Harper chuckled, more like a very tired librarian with a stubborn heart. Nadia knelt beside the fence, eyes softening as she looked at Finley. "Poor baby. But look at him now. That tail's moving." Theo edged forward half a step, emboldened by the gentle presence of another adult. "He doesn't bark," he said again, as if needing to remind himself. "He just listens." Nadia smiled at him. "Sounds like the best kind of friend, huh?" Theo said nothing, but for the first time in days, his hands weren't clenched. Harper took note. The sun began to dip, casting the backyard in a gentle orange haze. Harper stayed outside with Finley for another half hour, letting the quiet stretch between them. When she lifted him to take him inside, he didn't protest, just rested his head against her chest with a contented sigh. Inside, she set him back in his bed and whispered, "You did so good today. Proud of you, little warrior." That night, as Harper prepared dinner, something simple, just soup and toast, she glanced toward the window and saw Theo sitting on his porch, sketchbook in hand, peering occasionally across the street. She didn't wave this time. She just let him look, knowing it was enough. Finley slept soundly beside the radiator, wrapped in fleece, his tail still moving now and then in dreams. The first signs of joy, true, unfiltered joy, were beginning to surface like sunlight cracking through cloud. And somewhere in that small neighborhood, a boy afraid of barking and a dog too hurt to make a sound were beginning to meet in the space between silence. The sound was small, a crinkle, a rustle, nothing more than a twist of thin plastic as Harper pulled a fresh trash bag from the kitchen drawer. But the reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Finley, who had been curled contentedly near the refrigerator, lifted his head with a sudden jerk, his ears flattening. The moment the plastic snapped into its usual crinkling hiss, he bolted, legs stumbling, claws scrambling against tile, as he threw himself beneath the kitchen table, trembling violently. His tail tucked hard between his legs, his body curled so tightly he seemed to fold into himself. A soft, high-pitched whine escaped him, then another. He tried to bark, but it came out broken, strained, as if it hurt to use his voice. Harper dropped the bag. "No, sweetheart. Oh, baby, it's okay," she said, dropping to her knees. Her voice, instinctively gentle, now wavered with alarm. She moved slowly, never reaching for him, just crouching nearby and speaking softly. "It's gone. I put it away. Nothing's going to hurt you." Finley didn't move. He pressed his face into the floor, eyes wide with panic, chest rising too fast. Harper waited. A long minute passed, then two. When she dared slide a towel toward him, something soft, something familiar, he flinched but didn't retreat further. His breathing slowed slightly, his paws unfurled just a little. And finally, he blinked, once, twice. Harper sat beside him, her back to the cabinet, heart aching in her ribs. "It was just a bag," she whispered. "But for you it wasn't just a bag, was it?" In the days that followed, Harper made it a point to understand. She started keeping a notebook, not clinical, not cold, but personal, intimate. She began jotting things down. Day 8, crinkling plastic, panic, immediate, avoid in kitchen, try sound desensitization later. Day 9, newspaper, okay, tissue okay, trash bag, no. Day 10, tail wagged when I hummed near the back window. Try same melody near trigger sounds next week. She remembered what little training she'd received on trauma responses back when she worked in pediatric care, how certain sounds, smells, even light patterns could send children spiraling back into moments they hadn't survived, at least not emotionally. The brain doesn't always know the difference between now and then. And clearly, neither did Finley, so she adjusted. She kept bags pre-opened in a different room. She used fabric sacks instead. She began pairing soft music with light exposure to low-volume versions of trigger sounds. Plastic wrap she could crumple softly while praising him, clicking pens at a distance while feeding him treats. It wasn't therapy in the formal sense, but it was something even better. It was done with love. Meanwhile, across the street, Theo Madden was drawing again. This time, not dragons or star maps or schematics of imaginary cities. This time, he drew Finley, not as the weak, broken creature he had first glimpsed through a rain-streaked window, but as something noble. His pencil lines gave the dog a proud jaw, ears lifted, eyes sharp and knowing. He drew him leaping over puddles, sitting beside children, staring up at a moonlit sky with a thoughtful calm. In these sketches, Finley looked whole, like he had always belonged here. Theo didn't tell anyone about the drawings. Not his mother. Not Harper. He didn't even write his name on them. But one Thursday morning, just before school, he crept quietly to the edge of Harper's property, looked both ways twice, and slipped a folded page into the mailbox. Then he turned and walked quickly home, heart pounding, cheeks flushed. Later that day, Harper returned from a quick grocery run, paper bags only, and found the envelope. It wasn't sealed, just gently tucked. She opened it carefully and stared at the image inside. Finley, sitting proud and alert, a red bandana around his neck and stars drawn behind him like a constellation. She felt something twist in her chest. No signature, no message, but she knew. Somehow, she just knew. She pressed the drawing gently against her heart and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, she pinned it to the refrigerator with a sunflower magnet. Finley, now resting on a soft dog bed nearby, gave one curious glance at the sketch, but didn't seem impressed by his own fame. Harper sat beside him, running a hand along his back. "You're changing people," she murmured, without even knowing it. Later that week, Harper invited a new friend over, someone she'd met years ago but hadn't seen since college. Her name was Cassandra Lynn, a petite woman with a halo of tight black curls and a laugh that seemed too loud for someone who worked in trauma counseling. Cassandra had a background in animal-assisted therapy and now worked at a youth center downtown. She wore oversized knit sweaters, floral earrings, and mismatched socks on purpose, because, as she once explained, perfection is a liar. She came with tea, a bag of dog-safe cookies, and a notebook already open. "So," she said, settling into Harper's couch with Finley resting cautiously nearby, "tell me everything. Let's map his trauma response and see where we can intervene. This guy's got the eyes of an old poet." They spent an hour watching Finley's reactions to soft noises, to movement, to Cassandra's presence. Harper took notes. Cassandra made gentle observations. Finley, surprisingly, licked Cassandra's hand after just 20 minutes. "Progress," Cassandra said with a wink. "Also, I think he just conned me out of 2 cookies." After she left, Harper felt lighter, like maybe she wasn't navigating this whole thing alone. She turned on some soft music, dimmed the lights, and sat by the window, sipping her tea. Finley curled next to her, his head resting on her foot. Across the street, Theo sat at his own window, sketch pad on his lap again. This time, he was drawing 2 figures, one with long hair and glasses, the other with floppy ears and a tilted head, both sitting under a tree looking up at the stars. The scars were still there. The fear hadn't vanished, but they were all learning, slowly, together. The rain returned just after midnight, sweeping in from the coast in thick curtains, slicking the streets and dancing against Harper's windows like 1,000 small knocks begging to be let in. Thunder rolled far off in the distance, a dull growl that made the night feel older, heavier. Harper had always liked the sound of rain. It reminded her of pages turning in a quiet room. But tonight, the rhythm unsettled her. Something in the air felt stretched, pulled tight like a violin string. She had been asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old knit blanket, a novel still open on her chest. Finley lay on his bed near the radiator, paws twitching, tail occasionally thumping against the wood floor in fragmented movements. At first, Harper thought he was dreaming, maybe chasing something in a distant memory of freedom. But then the sound came, a soft whimper, followed by a low, guttural cry. Finley's legs jerked. His mouth opened in a silent bark, and his body stiffened as if frozen in panic. Harper dropped the book and crossed the room in seconds. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering before touching him gently. "Shh, Finley. It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice low and melodic. His breathing was fast and shallow, eyes still shut tight. He whimpered again, this time with desperation that scraped something raw inside her. She didn't hesitate. She slid into the dog bed beside him, curled her body around his trembling frame, and held him like a child. Her arms wrapped gently across his chest, her forehead against the crown of his head. He was warm, but his body was tense, every muscle coiled like a spring. She could feel his heartbeat racing beneath his ribs. Harper began to rock slightly, humming a tune she didn't recognize but seemed to know anyway. The same lullaby she used to hum for her little sister when the hospital nights felt endless. "You're not there anymore," she breathed against Finley's ear. "No one's gonna hurt you. Not now. Not ever again." Her fingers found the softest spot behind his ear and stayed there, steady, reassuring. She stayed until his body softened, until the tension leaked from his limbs, and his breath fell into a tired, slower rhythm. Then she whispered once more, "You're home now." Across the street, lights flickered behind closed curtains in the Madden house. Theo hadn't been able to sleep either. He'd sat by his window with his sketch pad, drawing shapes he couldn't name, lines that kept returning to the curve of Finley's ears. the quiet way Harper smiled. Tonight, for the first time, he wondered what Finley dreamt about, and why it made him cry. By morning, the rain had turned into a soft drizzle. Harper, bleary-eyed but grateful, brewed a pot of coffee and scrambled eggs while Finley snored lightly near the kitchen door. She watched the steam curl from the pan and thought about how many nights she had spent alone in this house, how different the silence felt now that it was occasionally broken by the soft thump of a tail or the brush of paws across wood. Something inside her had begun to shift. She looked at the time, then picked up her phone. After a long breath, she dialed. Michelle answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Harper?" "Hey," Harper said gently. "I know it's early, but would you and Theo like to come by later this morning? Just for a little while. I think Finley's ready." There was a pause, then a soft sigh. "If we come, it has to be on Theo's terms. No pressure, no expectations." "Of course," Harper said. "I'll make tea." Michelle arrived just before 10. She wore a navy peacoat, hair pulled back in a low bun, and carried a small thermos of cocoa. Theo followed 2 steps behind, hood up, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. He didn't speak, but his eyes darted around, scanning the yard, the porch, the windows. He looked more curious than afraid. Finley was inside, lying by the glass door that led to the backyard. The moment he saw movement, he lifted his head, still cautious, still unsure, but his tail gave a single polite wag. Harper opened the door slowly. "You can stay out here if you like," she said to Theo. "I'll bring him closer to the door so you can see." Theo said nothing, but he didn't turn away. Harper called softly, "Finley, come say hi." The dog rose slowly, padding forward with that careful, quiet grace he had developed in the wake of trauma. When he reached the threshold, he sat and looked at Theo. Not expectant, not pushy, just present. Theo glanced at his mother, who gave the smallest of nods. Then, with measured steps, he approached the edge of the porch. He didn't kneel. He didn't stretch out a hand. But he stood still, eyes locked with Finley's. Harper watched in silence. After a long moment, Finley blinked slowly and let out a soft exhale. His body relaxed. Then, to everyone's surprise, he lowered his head slightly, ears relaxed, and gave the gentlest little wag. Theo's lips parted. "That means he's not scared, right?" Harper smiled. "That means he's saying hello." Theo took 1 step closer. "Does he like drawings?" "He hasn't said otherwise," Harper replied. Theo nodded, as if that settled something. Then he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and laid it gently on the porch, just within Finley's reach. It was a new sketch. Finley curled up beneath a tree, a star hanging from one of its branches. Finley sniffed the edge of the paper. His tail gave another little sweep. Theo smiled. Michelle mouthed a silent thank you to Harper, her eyes misted with something more than just motherly pride. Harper smiled back, blinking fast. They didn't stay long. But before they left, Theo turned at the gate and said, not quite loud enough for his mother to hear, "Maybe next time I can sit closer." Harper nodded. "We'd like that." Back inside, Finley returned to his spot by the door. Harper sat beside him, the sketch resting on her lap. She traced the lines with her fingertips and whispered, "Look at you, a muse already." That night, the rain came again, softer this time, more like memory than storm, and Finley didn't whimper in his sleep. The sky that morning was a soft watercolor blend of pale blue and wisps of fog, the kind of light that made the world feel a little more hushed, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Harper stood in the hallway of her house, adjusting the angle of the welcome mat for the third time, though she didn't really know why. Nothing was out of place, and yet everything inside her fluttered like loose pages in the wind. Today was different. Today, someone important was coming inside. Not a stranger, but someone more delicate than anyone she'd ever hosted before. A boy with a history that mirrored Finley's in more ways than words could explain. Across the street, Michelle Madden waited at the bottom of the front steps while her son Theo stood frozen at the curb. His hood was down for once, revealing a head of carefully brushed sandy brown hair. His face was pale, lips pressed into a line, hands twitching at his sides like they couldn't decide whether to retreat or reach. He wore his favorite navy sweatshirt with the constellation stitched on the sleeve, a gift from his late uncle, the only person who had ever taken him camping. The sweatshirt made him feel brave. Today, he needed that. "It's just a visit," Michelle said gently, her voice warm but firm. You don't have to pet him. You don't even have to talk. Just go at your pace." Theo nodded once, barely perceptible, then began crossing the street. Harper opened the door before he knocked. She had made tea and cocoa, and laid out a small plate of chocolate chip cookies, not too close to the living room rug, in case Theo felt nervous about crumbs or mess. She greeted them both with a soft smile and stepped aside, motioning silently to the open space beyond. Finley lay near the window in his usual spot, calm and still, his head resting on his paws. Theo stepped inside slowly, his shoes tapping lightly against the wood floor. His gaze flickered from the hallway walls to the bookshelves, the furniture, the small ceramic plant pots in the corner, and then to Finley. He stopped, breath caught in his chest. Finley did not move. He watched the boy with quiet, curious eyes, ears neither perked nor flattened, tail still. It was not submission or indifference, it was respect. He had learned by now what fear looked like and how not to be loud in its presence. Theo took one step forward, then another. When he reached the couch, he sat, hands tucked between his knees, posture stiff. His eyes never left Finley. "He won't come over unless you want him to," Harper said gently, sitting on the far edge of the room. "He's good at waiting." Minutes passed like that, stillness wrapped in silence. Michelle sat near the entryway, her phone in hand, but her attention fully on her son. Harper poured the cocoa and left it on the coffee table, next to the cookies. Theo glanced at it but didn't reach. Then, with a breath barely audible, he asked, "Does he like music?" Harper's heart skipped. "I think so. He seems to like when I hum." Theo nodded slowly, then, after what felt like the slow unraveling of a tight knot, he began to hum something himself. Quiet, tentative. The tune was jagged at first, uncertain, then smoothed into a slow lullaby. Finley tilted his head. His ears twitched, and then he moved, just enough to raise his head, blink once, and let out a soft huff. Theo smiled, a real one, small but unmistakable. Harper and Michelle exchanged glances. Neither spoke. After several more minutes, Theo slid off the couch and sat cross-legged on the rug. Finley didn't approach, but neither did he move away. Theo extended one hand, not reaching, just resting it palm up on the floor. And after a beat that stretched like glass, Finley stood and walked forward, step by deliberate step, until he was beside the boy. Theo didn't flinch. Instead, with slow, careful movement, he lifted his hand and laid it gently on Finley's back, just between the shoulders. The fur there was soft, freshly brushed, warm. Finley closed his eyes and leaned forward, resting his chin lightly on Theo's knee. The room held its breath. Michelle let out a sound, something between a gasp and a sigh, and covered her mouth. Harper felt tears prick at her eyes, but blinked them back. This wasn't a moment to cry through. It was a moment to witness. They didn't move for several minutes. And then, as if something invisible passed between them, a contract signed in silence, Theo said, "Can I show him the backyard?" Harper nodded. Outside, the sun had begun to break through the thin veil of clouds. The backyard sparkled with leftover rain, the grass glistening. Harper opened the door, and Theo walked out first. Finley followed behind, not bounding, but walking with a grace that seemed almost reverent. They made it halfway across the lawn before a loud noise cracked the air, a car backfiring from the street beyond the trees. Harper turned sharply. So did Michelle. But Finley didn't bolt. He paused, ears back, muscles tense. But then he looked to Theo, who had frozen mid-step. "It's okay," Theo whispered, just loud enough to be heard. "That wasn't for us." And Finley believed him. The golden retriever took a tentative step forward, then another. Then, for the first time, he broke into a run. Not frantic, not wild, but joyful. He made a wide circle around the yard, tail high, legs steady. Theo laughed, really laughed, and clapped once. Finley barked, a short, sharp sound of celebration, and circled again before trotting back to the boy like a comet returning to orbit. Michelle wiped at her cheeks. "I never thought I'd see this." Harper smiled softly, standing near the door with her arms crossed. "Me neither." That evening, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, Harper sat with her laptop and opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to type. Today, a boy who couldn't touch dogs put his hand on the back of one that once feared people. Neither of them ran. Neither of them cried. Both of them stayed. She attached the photo she had taken, a snapshot from the window, showing Theo sitting on the lawn with Finley resting beside him, both of them gazing out into the distance like old friends with stories too big to tell. She uploaded the post to her blog, Second Chances, and closed the lid. By morning, the photo had been shared over 400 times. But for Harper, none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling that lingered in the house, the soft hum of connection, the healing that didn't come in grand declarations, but in the quiet touch of a hand on warm fur, and the stillness that said, "I trust you." By the time spring settled over Portland, the trees had begun their slow unraveling of blossoms, and the air tasted like fresh leaves and sunlight. The neighborhood that had once braced against rain and silence now woke each morning to birdsong and the smell of cut grass. It was the kind of season that seemed to insist, without words, that things could begin again. Harper Quinn stood by her front porch, watching Finley nose around the flower bed with the curious diligence of someone inspecting his kingdom. He had filled out now, no longer a fragile silhouette wrapped in fleece, but a glowing presence with golden fur that shimmered in the light like spun honey. The faint scars near his right shoulder were still there, but they didn't define him anymore. He was strength softened by kindness, confidence born of patience. Harper's heart swelled each time she looked at him. He wasn't just a dog, he was the shape of her healing, the mirror that had reflected her own journey back into the world. A week ago, she'd stood in line at the city shelter and filed the final paperwork to officially register Finley as hers, not just legally, but in every way that counted. The collar she placed around his neck that afternoon had a new tag: Finley Quinn, brave, loved. Today was the first community event Harper had organized in years. With the help of the local library, a few fellow bookshop owners, and a small dog rescue called Second Leash, she'd launched Paws and Pages, a hybrid fundraiser combining secondhand book sales, children's story time, and dog adoption showcases. They'd set up tents in the Central City Park, where benches curved beneath old oak trees and chalk drawings still clung to the pavement from a school event the week before. Harper had been up since dawn, packing crates of books, setting out folding chairs, brewing coffee, and stringing up banners between lampposts. At the heart of it all sat a booth labeled, "Meet Finley, a story of second chances." Behind the table were framed photos, the first night, the first tail wag, the first time Theo had placed a trembling hand on his back. Finley wore a red bandana around his neck and lay contentedly at the base of the table, surrounded by small children who had gravitated toward him as if by instinct. He didn't bark, he didn't jump, he simply watched and listened, letting toddlers pet him with sticky fingers and occasionally licking the back of a hand in return. He had become, somehow, the heartbeat of the park. Theo Madden arrived with his mother shortly after noon. He had grown taller in the past month, or maybe he just stood straighter. His sweatshirt today was forest green with a little embroidered dog on the pocket. He carried a stack of books in his arms and a plastic tote filled with hand-drawn bookmarks he'd made the night before, each one decorated with little sketches of dogs, stars, and quiet phrases like, "You're safe now," and "Keep reading, keep healing." Michelle, walking beside him, looked rested for once. Her dark hair was down, and she wore a denim jacket with small sunflowers stitched on the collar. She had become less the anxious mother bracing for setbacks, and more the steady presence cheering her son forward. "He's been practicing his reading all week," she said to Harper with a proud smile. "And the bookmarks? All his idea." Theo didn't say much at first. He simply nodded to Harper and knelt beside Finley, who lifted his head and gave a slow wag. They stayed like that for a while, boy and dog, quiet and comfortable in each other's gravity. Then, as the clock struck 2, Harper stepped onto a small wooden platform, adjusted the mic, and welcomed everyone to the event. She spoke briefly, just enough to say thank you and to share the meaning behind it all. That dogs like Finley and people like her and Theo deserved spaces where they could be seen, loved, and given a second chapter. The applause was soft but sincere. Then she introduced Theo. The boy stepped onto the platform, clutching a worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. His voice trembled at first, the pages shaking slightly in his hands, but as he read, something happened. His tones steadied, his eyes lifted. The words became richer, filled with warmth, as if he were pouring himself into every line. Children sat cross-legged at his feet, some clutching stuffed animals. A few dogs, adoptable rescues from second leash, lounged nearby, heads on paws, ears flicking lazily. Finley lay just to Theo's right, and at one point, without hesitation, the boy reached down and placed his hand gently on the golden fur. His fingers moved in slow circles as he continued reading, not missing a beat. Harper felt her throat close with emotion. The line came near the end. Once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. Theo closed the book. A moment of silence followed. Then the applause came, louder this time, fuller. Michelle wiped a tear from her cheek. Harper joined her. Afterward, people lined up to donate, to buy books, to pet the dogs. Several asked to meet Theo and Finley. One mother whispered that her daughter had been afraid of dogs since a bite last summer, but now she was petting one for the first time. Another man said he hadn't read a book in years, but hearing Theo made him want to visit the library again. Harper watched it unfold like a ripple, one small action spilling into another, like the way Finley's quiet recovery had somehow reached across to a boy's silent fear, and then outward into a community that needed reminding of what resilience looked like. As the sun began to lower and the booths were packed away, Theo walked back to Harper with a handful of empty bookmark sleeves and a wide grin. "We gave them all away," he said. "I'm not surprised," Harper replied. "You're kind of a big deal now." He looked at her, eyes serious. "Finley's the big deal." Finley, lying beside them, thumped his tail once in agreement. That evening, Harper sat on the front steps of her house, Finley beside her, head on her lap. The air smelled of spring rain and blooming daffodils. Her blog post from the morning, photos from the event, quotes from Theo, and reflections on courage had already been shared over 1,000 times. But it wasn't the reach that mattered. It was the truth of it. Finley stirred beside her. Sighing contentedly, she looked down at him and whispered, "You were meant for more than a cage, more than silence. You were meant for this." Across the street, Theo waved from his porch. His sketchpad rested on his knees, and he held up a new drawing, this time of Finley sitting on a book, surrounded by stars, a tiny crown on his head. Harper laughed. "Royalty suits you, little warrior." And in that quiet moment, beneath a sky bruised with sunset and filled with promise, the story of second chances reached its soft, golden close. Not with an ending, but with the beginning of everything that was finally right. Sometimes the miracles we pray for don't come with thunder or lightning. They come wrapped in fur, whimpering in silence, trembling on our kitchen floors. They come when we least expect it, through a puppy too broken to bark and a boy too afraid to speak. But if we listen, if we stay soft in a world that hardens us, we find that healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Finley was never meant to be a hero, neither was Theo. And yet together, they reminded us that love, real, patient, unconditional love, can pull life back from the edge. That even when the world abandons you in the storm, God doesn't. He sends help in the most unexpected forms. Sometimes he sends a dog. So if you've ever felt forgotten, if your heart carries scars no one sees, know this, your story isn't over, it's just beginning. May the Lord bless you for every kindness you've given, even when no one was watching. And may he send you your own Finley in whatever form you need most. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and share it. Subscribe to join a family that believes in second chances, silent prayers, and small miracles that change everything. And if you believe love still wins, type below, God still sends Finleys.
A loud crash echoed through the 21st floor, glass everywhere, and in that split second, Rune was flying, not jumping, thrown. The German Shepherd's paws clawed at the broken edge of the window, dangling 200 feet above Chicago's midnight streets. His handler screamed. The team froze. Time held its breath. But what happened next? It didn't just save a life, it changed everything. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? Because this is not just a story about a dog, it's about every hero who never lets go. The glass shattered before the scream had time to form. A high, splintering sound cracked through the night as the window on the 21st floor burst outward, sending sharp fragments into the darkness like frozen lightning. Wind rushed in, wild and merciless, and in that chaos, a large figure moved through the opening. Not jumping, not falling, but thrown. Rune's powerful body cut through the air in a violent arc. His front paws reached the jagged window frame and caught, claws scraping desperately against concrete. Below him stretched nothing but open sky and cold, indifferent steel. 200 feet beneath, the grid of Chicago's streets waited in eerie silence. His hind legs swung freely in the air. For a suspended moment, time surrendered its rhythm. Rune clung, muscles trembling, amber eyes wide with instinct and confusion, staring back into the broken room from where he had been hurled. His paws slipped slightly. He gasped once, a sound not quite a bark, not quite a cry, just raw breath. Then came the footsteps, heavy boots crashing against shattered glass, racing toward him. Ansel Viero, dark jacket flaring behind him like a cape, face contorted in something primal. He wasn't shouting orders. There was no protocol, no strategy, only instinct. Only the unbearable reality that his partner, his one constant, was slipping away. Weeks earlier, Rune had been just another name on a file folder, stamped with the kind of labels that made officers uncomfortable. Difficult to bond. Highly intelligent. Previous handler transferred after behavioral conflict. 5 years old, the report said, though the age hardly mattered. Rune looked seasoned, strong, broad-chested, with sable fur streaked in places like shadowed stone. One of his ears stood fully erect. The other had a slight fold near the top, a detail that made him appear both noble and wounded. His eyes were amber, deep-set, the color of burnt honey, filled with that quiet ache only seen in creatures that had lost something they still remembered. The kennel had been dim when Ansel first saw him. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting harsh white on the steel bars. Rune sat at the back, still and silent, not reacting to the visitors, not barking or pacing like the others, just watching. Beside Ansel stood Sarah Brinks, senior canine supervisor, a woman of lean frame and no-nonsense posture. Her short auburn hair was streaked with gray at the temples, and her green eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who'd seen too many matches between damaged dogs and damaged people. She rubbed her forearm absent-mindedly as she said, "He won't come to you fast. Doesn't mean he won't come at all, but you'll have to earn it." Ansel hadn't answered. He simply opened the gate, crouched, and waited. Rune looked at him with that unblinking stare, then stood, padded forward, and sat. No tail wag, no fear, just acknowledgement. Ansel Viero had the kind of face that didn't smile by accident, tall and lean, with a frame that looked like it had been built for long nights and long fights. His jaw was sharp, beard left untended, and beneath the olive tones of his skin lay shadows that weren't from lack of sleep. His eyes, dark and tired, seemed to be waiting for someone to prove they were worth meeting. He hadn't worked with a dog since the death of his last partner, a woman named Sienna, taken by a bullet during a warehouse sting 2 years ago. Since then, he'd avoided K-9 assignments, preferred the silence. But his captain had insisted, either Rune gets reassigned to you or he's retired. That night, Ansel brought Rune home to his apartment overlooking the Chicago River. It was sparse. Concrete floors, low furniture, walls lined with books, and a single photograph face down on a shelf. Rune explored without much interest, pausing only at the sliding glass door. There he sat, gaze fixed toward the skyline, ears perked toward a tall, skeletal tower across the water, the Granville Spire, abandoned since the financial crash. 21 floors of steel and glass, slated for demolition for years, but still somehow standing. Rune watched it like it whispered to him. Days passed. Rune ate sparingly, slept lightly, and didn't respond to toys or training treats. But on the 6th night, he growled, just once, low and sharp, as he stood again at the glass door. Ansel followed his gaze. The Granville building. A light flickered on the top floor, then vanished. The next day, during a routine sweep of a former electronics lab, Rune picked up something no one else noticed. A plastic case wedged behind a false panel. Inside, encrypted drives, hidden tech, things meant never to be found. It wasn't just good luck. It was pattern. Rune wasn't sniffing out the scent of food or explosives. He was tracking something deeper. Intent. That same week, another package was found. Same design, same hiding style, this time in a derelict hotel on the west side. A pattern began to form, and then came the call. A raid. Midnight. A suspect linked to digital trafficking and physical data laundering had been tracked to the Granville Spire. Rune and Ansel were cleared to lead the K9 sweep. They entered from the back, ascending through exposed stairwells, their boots echoing in hollow cement. Plastic sheets fluttered in the broken windows, and the air reeked of dust and cold machinery. On the 21st floor, something shifted. Rune froze. His tail stiffened. His breath slowed. Then a noise, metal against metal, the sound of equipment being hurriedly gathered. They breached. Inside the room, the suspect turned fast. He was tall, wrapped in black from throat to boots, with hands gloved and a hood over his face. As Rune lunged, precise, trained, efficient, the man caught him mid-air, not to restrain, to throw. The motion was sudden, brutal. The window shattered. Rune went flying. Now the floor is chaos. Ansel sprints, yelling Rune's name into the wind. The world narrows to the shape of a dog clinging by his paws to a cracked frame of concrete and broken glass. Rune's claws scrape, his legs swing. His muscles tremble with the weight of gravity. Wind roars past his ears. The city below seems to rise toward him like the ocean under a falling stone. His grip falters. Ansel is almost there. Rune's paws slip, and the world holds its breath. The weight of Rune's body nearly pulled him down. For a single, soul-crushing instant, Ansel Vero thought he'd been too late. But his hands locked around the harness just below Rune's shoulders, fingers gripping the rough nylon like a lifeline. There was no room for hesitation. His knees dug into the shards and debris lining the edge of the blown-out window, glass biting into his palms as he pulled with every shred of strength he had. Rune's claws scrambled wildly at first, then caught on the jagged sill. Behind them, 2 officers had finally moved from shock into action. One grabbed Ansel by the vest, the other caught Rune by the hindquarters. Together, they heaved. The moment Rune tumbled into Ansel's chest and collapsed against him, time crashed back into motion. Sirens still wailed below. Radios crackled, boots stomped, commands barked. But for Ansel, there was nothing else. Just the dog in his arms, alive, shaking, breathing fast but steady. The man who had thrown Rune was gone. The equipment, wires, monitors, surveillance drives, left behind, hastily abandoned. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of how he got out. It didn't matter yet. Rune was alive. They descended the stairwell not in victory, but in heavy silence. Rune limped slightly, not from injury, but from shock. His eyes darted toward windows with a kind of wide-eyed dread that Ansel hadn't seen before. The handler kept one hand on Rune's back the entire way down, grounding them both. Outside, the rain had started. Soft at first, then growing stronger as they reached the black SUVs parked along the perimeter. A female paramedic approached, petite and quick, with kind eyes and rubber gloves already on. Her name tag read M. Harper, and she crouched carefully near Rune. "Can I check him?" she asked. Ansel only nodded. She was gentle with him, professional. The kind of calm that comes from too many nights like this. She had short curls tucked under her rain hood and moved like someone used to working around fear. After a few minutes, she said softly, "No broken bones, just trauma, like he's holding something in his chest." "So am I," Ansel muttered, voice lower than the rain. Later, back at the precinct, the team filed reports. The air was tense, but no one spoke above a murmur. Everyone had seen the footage. Body cam video of Rune being thrown, the clawing, the fall, the catch. Someone had uploaded a clip to the internal server. Within hours, it leaked. Ansel sat alone in the break room, lights off, fingers still trembling. Rune lay under the table, breathing slow now, but alert. His head rested against Ansel's boot. Sarah Brinks entered without knocking. Her figure always cast a tall, lean silhouette against door frames. She walked like someone who'd seen war zones and survived them. Back held straight, hands usually fidgeting with something when she didn't know what to say. Tonight, it was a tea bag still in its wrapper. She stood in silence for a moment, watching Rune. "He shouldn't have survived that," she said at last. "I've seen dogs fall from less and never get up." Ansel didn't respond. She took a few steps forward and sat opposite him, her knees cracking faintly as she lowered herself into the plastic chair. Her eyes scanned Rune's posture, the tremor in one paw, the way he avoided looking toward the windows. "He's going to change," she said quietly. "You both will." "I know." Sarah had lost a dog years ago, one of the first dogs she'd ever trained. They'd been inseparable for 4 years, until a car bomb took him in a raid gone wrong. She never worked field again after that. She shifted into training, evaluation, logistics, but not because she stopped loving the work, because she never wanted to be that close again. Since then, she'd spoken with a gentler tone around injured animals and a more clipped one around injured people. After a pause, she added, "Take the leave they're offering, let him rest, and you too." Ansel looked down at Rune, who stared back up with those unreadable eyes. "I can't let him feel alone in this," he said. The next morning, Ansel brought Rune home, this time not as a tactical partner, but as something more fragile. He removed the harness, laid out a blanket, and watched as Rune circled the room slowly, inspecting every corner like a soldier back from war. He didn't sit by the window anymore. He curled near the wall. He flinched at the sound of slamming drawers. Ansel didn't talk much that week. He didn't turn on the TV. He sat on the floor near Rune, drank his coffee there, made phone calls from there. Sometimes Rune would lift his head and lay it on Ansel's knee. Sometimes they would just listen to the rain. On the 5th night, the precinct called. They had another case, an abandoned property on the edge of Little Village. The report was vague, rumors of strange signals, buzzing, flickering lights in the dead of night, the kind of low-priority assignment that would have been dismissed if not for the pattern. Ansel almost said no. But Rune stood at the door. He stared at the leash on the hook, then back at Ansel. It wasn't wagging tails or eager barking. It wasn't about excitement. It was resolve, a quiet agreement. Rune was ready. So they went. The house was a long-forgotten brick structure wrapped in ivy and decay. Inside, it smelled like mildew and old wires. Rune moved cautiously, but focused. He didn't look toward the windows. He didn't shake. He moved with purpose. In a back room, he froze. Nose low, body tight. There, hidden beneath floorboards, they found another cache. Labeled devices, surveillance logs, detailed maps of police movements. The markings were identical to those found weeks earlier, but one device was different. This one had been opened, data already extracted. It was still warm to the touch. Someone had been here, recently. Ansel glanced down. Rune stood beside him. No growl this time, only stillness. "Good boy," Ansel whispered. Rune didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. The house had been empty for over a decade. At least, that's what the city records claimed. But inside the rotting walls and beneath the collapsed ceiling tiles, the floorboards told a different story. There were fresh scuff marks near the back doorway, a smell of burned circuitry, and, in the small storage room that had once housed a furnace, a long strand of black thread snagged on the handle of a rusted cabinet, fresh, out of place, and unmistakably synthetic. Rune's nose hovered over the spot. He did not growl. Instead, his body stiffened, tail low, breath short. Ansel stood behind him, flashlight casting a thin cone of light against peeling wallpaper and broken glass. The same feeling again. Presence, and not long gone. "We're not alone," he whispered. Rune took 2 steps forward, then stopped. The air was wrong. No wind, but something moved. Not physically, energetically. A pressure that prickled just behind the eyes. Then, in the corner of the room, nearly missed, Ansel saw it. A box, matte black, slightly larger than a hard drive, half buried beneath a plastic tarp. He crouched and reached for it, careful not to shift the weight too fast. Rune's ears twitched. The device had no branding, just a single red dot painted in the center. A mark, maybe, or a warning. He placed it into a seal-tight evidence pouch. Back at the precinct, Ansel filed his report. 2 confirmed sites within the same district, both containing encrypted storage devices, each one more advanced, more concealed. And now, this third, nearly activated. The tech team took the new drive into analysis, but they were already weeks behind. The enemy wasn't just hiding data, they were building something. Monitoring, waiting. And Rune had found it all. The K-9 unit's commander, Lieutenant Marcus Harlan, called Ansel into his office the following morning. Harlan was broad-shouldered, late 40s, with a salt and pepper beard trimmed to military precision and a voice like gravel on asphalt. He had served in 2 branches before joining law enforcement and spoke in clipped phrases, never using 2 words when one would do. He sat behind a desk cluttered with open case files and tapped a pen rhythmically against the wood. "I need you to listen carefully," he said, his dark eyes locked on Ansel. "Rune's name just showed up on a forum we've been monitoring. Not public, deep net, encrypted exchanges. Someone called him the scent that ruins silence. They're tracking him, which means they're tracking you." Ansel didn't blink. "We shut the forum down, but it'll pop up again. Different server, different code. This isn't just about storing illegal data anymore. They're running counterintelligence on us, and they're doing it with precision." That word again, precision. Ansel didn't trust Easy, but he trusted Rune, and now that bond was being weaponized. They weren't targeting police operations, they were targeting trust. That afternoon, after hours of meetings and little sleep, Ansel drove back to his apartment. Rune sat beside him in the passenger seat, upright but quieter than usual, eyes scanning every sidewalk, every shadow. At a red light, Rune leaned gently against his shoulder. The gesture was small, but Ansel felt the weight of it more than anything said in the precinct that day. When they reached the building, Rune hesitated before stepping out of the car. His gaze swept upward toward the balcony of the apartment. Then he moved. Inside, the air was still. Ansel dropped his keys on the counter and exhaled as he unzipped his jacket. Rune padded across the room and settled on the rug near the coffee table. He no longer went to the window. That trust would take longer to rebuild. Ansel poured himself a glass of water, but before he could sit, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Then a second buzz. This time, a text. "She's with me. Don't panic. Just call. Jess." His chest tightened. He hadn't spoken to Jess in weeks, maybe months. Mira's mother had made her boundaries clear after the separation. They shared joint custody but rarely exercised it. Mira was better off without the ghosts Ansel carried around, or so everyone said. Still, he called. Jess picked up after the second ring. "She wanted to see you," she said. Her voice was softer than he remembered, tired but not angry. "She saw the video. Everyone has. Rune, the fall, you catching him. It's everywhere." Ansel said nothing. "She hasn't stopped talking about it since. I told her to let it go, but this morning she looked at me and said, 'He doesn't talk to people, but I think he talks to the dog.' And honestly, I don't think she's wrong." When Jess arrived 30 minutes later, she parked at the curb but didn't get out. Mira came alone. She was almost as tall as her mother now, with the same dark eyes but softer in shape, framed by a crown of wild curls pulled back into a ponytail that refused to stay neat. She wore a navy windbreaker with paint stains on one sleeve, jeans with one knee blown out, and a satchel bag covered in stickers. She didn't knock. She stood outside the apartment door for a moment, breathing, then pressed the bell. Ansel opened it slowly, unsure what to say. Mira didn't wait for him to speak. She looked past him into the living room, then down. There was Rune, sitting just behind Ansel's leg, still and alert. "You're even bigger in real life," she whispered. Rune tilted his head slightly. Then, to Ansel's surprise, padded forward, paused, and sat directly in front of her. Mira lowered herself to her knees and held out her hand. Rune leaned forward, sniffed, then gently pressed his forehead to her palm. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her bag. It wasn't a toy. It was a scarf, handmade, woven unevenly but full of care, deep forest green with threads of brown and black, like earth after rain. She tied it carefully around Rune's neck, eyes never leaving his. "There," she said softly. "Now no one will forget who you are." Rune didn't shake it off. He didn't move. He stayed. Later, Ansel stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching Mira and Rune sitting on the floor together. She was telling him stories, quietly, earnestly, as if he could understand every word. And maybe he could. She spoke of school, of nightmares she didn't tell her mother about, of feeling invisible in rooms full of people. Rune listened, ears twitching at every rise and fall in her voice. "I think you're like me," she whispered at one point. "You feel more than you show." Ansel felt something shift then. Not in Rune, not in Mira, but in himself. A small crack in the wall he'd spent years building, not because it had broken, but because someone had finally knocked, gently enough for it to open. It started with the water bowl. Rune had always been a neat drinker, steady, measured laps, followed by a slow turn away and a soft sigh before curling up under the window. But over the past 2 days, he had only sniffed at the water and walked off. His appetite, always modest, vanished entirely. At night, his paws paced against the hardwood, rhythmically, ceaselessly, as if responding to something unheard. Ansel noticed. Of course he did. On the third evening, he sat quietly on the couch, a book open but unread in his hands. Rune stood by the sliding glass door, body taut, staring toward the skyline where the Granville spire loomed in shadow. Not the tower they had raided weeks ago, but another one, taller, older, known simply as the Ellison. It had once been a government office building before being sold to a private investor and left unfinished after structural cracks were discovered. Most of the windows on the upper floors had been removed during aborted renovations, leaving the top of the tower looking like a ribcage in the sky. Rune had started growling at it, low, sustained, like a warning he wasn't entirely certain how to express. Ansel had looked out the window more than once. There was nothing to see, no lights, no movement, just a skeletal building and the wind slipping through open concrete. But Rune knew something. The next morning, Ansel called Sarah Brinks, not as his superior, but as someone who had seen more of this than anyone else. He caught her just as she was leaving the precinct gym, hair pulled back beneath a faded ball cap, sleeves rolled to the elbows, a tired but alert look on her narrow face. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as she sipped from a dented water bottle. "You're not wrong," she said when he finished. "He's seeing it before we do. They always do. It's not ghosts. It's geometry. Space changes when people leave their intentions in it." Ansel frowned. "That sounds like poetry." Sarah smirked. "I've worked with enough of these dogs to know that if they're afraid of a place, it's not the wind they're hearing." She suggested a veterinary behaviorist named Dr. Lucian Harrow, a quiet man in his late 50s who looked more like a jazz pianist than a veterinarian. He had a narrow face with deep smile lines, always dressed in muted tones, soft blazers, corduroy slacks, glasses with lenses slightly too large for his face. He met them in a converted townhouse in Pilsen, where walls were lined with books about animal cognition and old framed photos of rescue dogs climbing rubble. He didn't ask many questions. Instead, he observed Rune for half an hour as the dog explored the softly lit exam room. No cages, no exam tables, just rugs, cushions, and the faint smell of lavender. After watching Rune avoid the window 3 separate times, Harrow finally spoke. "He's anticipating an outcome," he said gently, voice calm and deliberate. "He's not reacting to what he sees. He's reacting to what he believes is coming." "Danger," Ansel muttered, "or memory, or some combination of both." This particular behavior, hypervigilance paired with environmental fixation, is often seen in dogs with a trauma that hasn't had a resolution. "You're saying he's reliving it?" "I'm saying he's forecasting it," Harrow replied, fingers tapping lightly on a notebook. "Dogs don't dream in words, they dream in patterns. If something has happened once, they assume it will happen again. And if they sense a place feels too familiar, they warn us." Harrow nodded. "If they trust us enough to try." That night, Ansel didn't speak much. Rune curled near the coffee table again, but didn't sleep. He only watched the Ellison building through the window, unmoving, breath shallow. And then Mira returned. She arrived with a backpack over one shoulder and a sketchbook clutched tight to her chest. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something urgent, something she hadn't yet put into words. Her curls were still tangled from sleep, and she wore an oversized hoodie that nearly swallowed her frame. Ansel hadn't expected her so soon. Jess had texted only an hour before, saying Mira had been restless for days. "She asked to come. I think you should let her." Mira stepped inside, looked directly at Rune, and sat beside him on the rug without speaking. Ansel watched from the kitchen, arms crossed. After a few minutes, she opened the sketchbook. "I had a dream," she said, not looking up. "I don't know if it's real, but it felt real, like it already happened. Or it's about to." She turned the page. The drawing was rough, done in pencil and smudged by small fingers, but the lines were unmistakable. A high window, shards of broken glass, a dark figure hanging by the paws. Rune. Ansel felt the chill climb the back of his neck. Mira looked up at him, her voice low. "He was falling, but But it wasn't the same place from before. The sky was different. The building was different. And he didn't cry out. He just looked at you. Ansel knelt beside her and gently took the sketchbook. Why did you draw this? I don't know. I woke up and it was still in my head. It wouldn't go away. He looked at Rune, who now had shifted slightly, resting his chin on her leg. Maybe he told me, Mira whispered. That night, Ansel didn't sleep. He sat on the balcony with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, watching the Ellison Tower. The wind came in steady waves, soft at first, then louder as the hours passed. The shape of the tower was menacing, hollow, filled with nothing, and somehow still watching. Rune eventually came outside. He didn't growl. He didn't lie down. He just stood beside Ansel, and together they waited for something neither could name. The Ellison Tower stood like a skeleton against the clouds, its broken top floors yawning open to the wind. Concrete ribs framed the sky, the windows hollowed out during an abandoned renovation. It was the kind of place no one looked at twice, until Rune started staring at it every night like he knew something the rest of them didn't. The order came at dawn, an anonymous tip. Confirmed movement on the 21st floor, possibly armed suspects, tech equipment seen through thermal scans. It was the break the task force had been waiting for. After weeks of dead ends and encrypted silence, the hunt had a pulse again. Ansel dressed quietly. Mira was still asleep on the couch, curled into a blanket, Rune's scarf clutched in one hand. Rune sat by the door already, alert and waiting, as if he had sensed the call before the phone had even buzzed. He wore his harness like it was armor, standing tall but still, a stillness that held something tight beneath the surface. At the site, the air was dry and sharp, the kind of wind that cracked skin and carried secrets. Lieutenant Marcus Harlan met them at the perimeter, his bulk wrapped in a black tactical coat, gray hair tucked under his cap. He gave a terse nod and pointed toward the entrance. We sweep all 21 floors. You and Rune lead the primary vertical unit. If there's something up there, I want him to smell it before we see it. The rest of the team moved in silence. Among them was Officer Donna Rivas, the newest addition to the unit. She was tall, wiry, with dark, intense eyes and short hair that she kept tucked under a helmet. She had transferred from a special ops team in New Mexico after her partner was killed in a border ambush, a detail she didn't talk about, but wore in her walk and the quiet fire in her posture. She carried herself like someone who had learned not to depend on anyone, and yet she always watched Rune like she understood him. The tower was cold and hollow. Every step echoed through open stairwells. Rune led the way, nose low, ears turning constantly. His paws moved with practiced grace, silent against concrete and debris. As they climbed, Ansel stayed close, one hand on Rune's harness, feeling the tension in the dog's frame rise with every level. When they reached floor 21, Rune froze. It wasn't a reaction of fear, it was confirmation. He had known all along. The floor was littered with remnants of half-finished renovations, metal beams stacked near the center, tangled cords along the walls, a scattering of empty crates. But, tucked at the far end, near the windowless side of the tower, was movement. Subtle. Wrong. Rune moved before Ansel could stop him, a blur of muscle and certainty. He darted through a narrow gap between stacked drywall sheets and disappeared around the corner. "Rune!" Ansel shouted, following fast. He rounded the edge and saw the man. Dressed in black from boots to gloves, face obscured by a tactical mask, the figure was hunched over a cluster of portable drives connected by snaking wires to a satellite unit. He looked up. Not surprised, not afraid, prepared. Rune lunged, but the man reacted faster than anyone should have. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't run. He grabbed Rune by the harness mid-air, twisted, and with a force that seemed impossible, hurled him toward the shattered window. Glass exploded. The world stopped. Rune's body crashed through the air, spinning slightly. Then, miraculously, his front paws hooked the jagged lower ledge of the open window frame. He clung, chest heaving, eyes wide. There was no sound but the wind, howling now, furious. Ansel screamed his name. He ran, faster than he thought he could move. Time fractured. Every breath, every step, every heartbeat stretched like a slow collapse. Rune's paws began to slip. Ansel launched himself forward, diving across the glass-littered floor. His hands gripped the frame just beneath Rune's legs. Blood smeared across his knuckles as he pulled. Hard. Rune's claws tore against the ledge, kicking, scrambling. Then the weight shifted. Two more officers appeared, Rivas and another from the rear unit, reaching, hauling, dragging. They pulled Rune inside. He collapsed on top of Ansel, shaking. His chest heaved, tongue out, eyes still wild with the memory of air and gravity. Ansel wrapped both arms around him, burying his face into Rune's damp fur. It smelled of dust and fear and survival. No one spoke. The suspect had vanished, gone through a rear corridor, leaving behind his equipment, half-uploaded drives, and a trail of wires that led to nowhere. Back on the ground, medics checked Rune's vitals while the rest of the team swept the floor. Rune had no broken bones, no visible injuries, but his eyes were changed. That evening, the footage from Ansel's body cam was uploaded for debrief. By morning, it had leaked. It began as a silent clip. No audio, just the image of a German shepherd falling through air, then clawing for life. Then the lunge, the rescue, the impact. Within hours, it went viral. News anchors described Rune as a hero. Headlines read like war poems. He hangs so we can breathe. The dog who refused to fall. Social media flooded with tributes. Artists drawing stills from the clip, retired officers posting stories of their own. K9S. Ansel turned off the TV. He sat on the floor beside Rune, who was curled under the windowsill once more, though not watching the skyline. Not yet. Mira arrived that afternoon. She didn't speak when she came in, just dropped her bag, walked over, and slid to the floor beside Rune. She laid a hand on his side. "I saw it," she whispered, "but you came back." Rune closed his eyes, and for the first time since the fall, exhaled slowly into her hand. The first time Rune heard the sound of a tactical door breach after the fall, he didn't bark. He didn't move. He froze. Every muscle locked, ears pulled back, tail stiff and low to the floor. It had come from the TV, just background noise in a training montage on the evening news. But for Rune, the noise was no longer harmless. His eyes darted to the window instinctively, then to Ansel, who stood nearby holding a half-eaten sandwich, suddenly very, very still. 2 days later, it happened again during a morning walk. A metal sign banged against a construction fence as the wind caught it. Rune dropped to the pavement and began to tremble. He recovered quickly. But Ansel saw it. He saw everything now. Back at the precinct, Sarah Brinks watched Rune from across the training field. She hadn't said much since the fall, but her eyes followed him like she was measuring something that couldn't be put into words. That afternoon, she pulled Ansel aside into her office. A small windowless room filled with dog handler manuals and newspaper clippings from a decade ago, most of them faded with time. "You need to talk to someone," she said simply, eyes fixed on a spot just past his shoulder. "Not for you, for him. He's not broken. But if you pretend this isn't real, you'll break him trying to pretend." Ansel didn't argue. He made the call. 2 mornings later, they met Dr. Kayla Denham. She was younger than Ansel expected, early 30s, though her expression carried the weight of someone older, slender with long limbs and a quiet, observational grace. She wore soft, neutral colors and walked like she was always listening. Her hair was pinned back into a low twist, a pencil tucked behind one ear, and her glasses perched at the edge of her nose, constantly being pushed back with her knuckle. She was a veterinary behavioral specialist who had once worked with military working dogs returning from combat zones. She didn't believe in quick fixes or magic phrases. She believed in slow trust. Her first session with Rune took place in the station's therapy wing, converted from a former filing room, now filled with blankets, puzzle toys, and low ambient noise. Rune entered cautiously. He sniffed once, circled the rug, then settled beneath a padded bench. Kayla sat cross-legged on the floor, not looking directly at him. "He doesn't have to approach me," she said to Ansel, who stood tense by the door. "We'll start with presence, not pressure." Over the course of several days, Rune began to shift. Not drastically, but he stayed longer, blinked more slowly, began to eat again, especially if Ansel sat beside him and didn't speak. It wasn't a recovery. It was a beginning. In the meantime, the investigation around the fall at the Ellison building deepened. The satellite array left behind by the suspect had been partially active when seized. Forensics confirmed that a data upload had been in progress during the raid, one cut short by Rune's intervention. The contents were encrypted far beyond precinct protocols, requiring third-party clearance. Enter Celine Moore. She arrived in a slate-gray coat that moved like liquid, with high boots and a leather messenger bag slung crosswise over her body. Her features were striking. Pale, sharply angular, eyes like obsidian glass set into a face that rarely softened. She had once worked for the Tribune's Special Investigation Unit before resigning after a piece she'd written exposed a municipal corruption ring and put her family under threat. Since then, she'd worked freelance, taking on stories no one wanted, and more than once being escorted out of crime scenes before later being hired to help unravel them. Sarah had met her years ago and trusted her with caution. Ansel didn't trust her at all, at least not yet. But when Celine laid out what she had uncovered in just 48 hours, the room fell into a stunned silence. She had accessed forums, chatter, and transaction records showing payments routed through shell corporations to freelance operatives, people trained not to infiltrate police departments, but to monitor and target K9 units specifically. Each dog had a file, a profile, a psychological breakdown, strengths, weaknesses, preferred handlers, deployment schedules. Rune's file was the longest. They knew about his instincts, Celine said, scrolling through digital pages with a finger. They knew he detects early. They knew he had loyalty issues, which to them meant predictability. They weren't just trying to kill him, Ansel murmured, jaw tightening. They were trying to break what he represents. Celine nodded. Your bond, your advantage. They can't predict instinct, but they can destroy it. And once they do, the handler collapses too. Sarah leaned against the wall, arms folded tightly. Her expression was unreadable, but her fingers tapped against her elbow, like they were hiding something they wanted to say out loud. Celine continued, This isn't about one operation. It's about destabilization. Break enough dogs, and you break trust inside the force. Handlers lose faith. Departments pull funding. K9 units become liabilities instead of assets. Where's it coming from? Asked Sarah. Still chasing the trail, Celine admitted. But the server that housed these records was linked to a private security firm operating out of Vancouver. The firm's ownership is buried under 6 layers of offshore corporations. Ansel looked down at Rune, who lay quietly beneath the table, one ear flicking occasionally at the sound of boots in the hallway. Do you think he knows? Ansel asked, not really meaning to say it aloud. Celine didn't blink. I think he knew before any of us did. That night, Ansel drove home in silence. Rune lay in the back seat, eyes half closed, chest rising and falling with shallow steadiness. When they reached the apartment, Mira met them at the door, barefoot in pajamas, her hair a tangled halo of sleep. He's better, she said softly, kneeling down and wrapping her arms around Rune's neck. Rune leaned into her. Not much, but enough. Ansel stood behind them, watching. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, Rune had eaten, had rested, had allowed someone near, and in a world full of shadows, that was enough light to begin again. The building was wrong the moment they saw it. From the outside, it was unremarkable. Red brick facade, 3 stories tall, flanked by a boarded-up deli and an abandoned laundromat. But the windows, though dusty, were spotless near the frames. The locks on the door were new. And most telling of all, there was no graffiti. Not one tag, not even on the back wall, which in this part of town was as unnatural as silence during rush hour. Celine noticed it first. She stepped out of the car, her long coat catching the early evening breeze, and ran one gloved hand along the edge of a window pane. She was dressed sharper than usual tonight. Charcoal boots, black jeans, and a deep green wool sweater under her coat. But her eyes were tired. Tired from chasing truths too long, too hard. She brushed away a faint smudge and tilted her head. No dust buildup on the seals. Someone's been opening these from the inside, she said quietly. Ansel crouched beside Rune, checking the harness, adjusting the collar. The dog stood tense but steady, his focus fixed on the building's rooftop, where nothing moved. But everything waited. Ansel's clothes were plain, black jacket, scuffed jeans, a scarf Mira had insisted he wear. But his eyes had the same tight edge they always had before a raid. Controlled fury waiting for a direction. Thermals? He asked. Celine tapped the side of her watch, connected to a discreet scanner buried under her sleeve. A faint beeping confirmed the results. No human heat signatures. But I'm picking up frequency chatter. Weak. Cloaked. It's bouncing off the rooftop antenna. Low bandwidth pulses every 4 seconds. Still transmitting? Still pulsing, which means someone left it running. Ansel rose and looked at Rune. The dog gave no signal, no bark, no whine, just one silent glance, a blink, then a soft paw forward. That was enough. They entered through the back. The lock gave way to a thin pry bar and a bit of quiet pressure. Inside, the air was warm, unnaturally so, humming slightly from concealed wiring behind the walls. The hallway stretched narrow and gray, with silent security cams tucked beneath ceiling tiles. Rune moved ahead, nose close to the floor, tail horizontal, ears switching left and right like radar. The first floor was empty, office chairs stacked in a corner, a few labeled crates marked "Outgoing West." But the second floor, Rune paused at the top of the stairs, his body motionless. Then, slowly, he turned toward a vent cover and emitted a low growl. "Found it," Ansel whispered. Inside the vent, beneath a false panel, was a palm-sized data unit, sleek, matte, and humming faintly. But unlike the others they had found, this one wasn't sealed. It was blinking. "It's transmitting in real time," Celine murmured, crouching beside it. "Whatever's in here isn't being stored, it's being sent." Ansel scanned the room. "Then someone's watching us." He was right. The door behind them creaked, and Rune spun with a bark that cracked through the silence. A shadow moved at the stairwell. Fast, precise, too familiar. Ansel stepped forward, firearm drawn, but a voice rang out that stopped him cold. "Drop it, Viero!" The man who stepped into the frame was tall, late 40s, wearing a simple officer's jacket zipped halfway and tactical boots that hadn't been issued in 5 years. His hair was short, thinning at the temples, and his eyes were pale, almost colorless under the fluorescent light. His name was Detective Alton Reeve, and he had been with Internal Affairs for almost 2 decades. Ansel's breath didn't move. "You," Reeve smiled without humor. "We always knew you'd dig too deep." Celine's fingers twitched near her coat, where a hidden recorder had been sewn into the lining. Rune stood protectively between them, body low, teeth slightly bared, silent and ready. Reeve raised a sidearm. "You're not leaving with that device." "It's over, Alton," Celine said calmly, her voice a knife in velvet. "We've traced the offshore wires, the Vancouver shell. It all leads back to a contract you approved. I approved a lot of things, but some dogs," he said, eyes flicking to Rune, "just bite too hard." Rune growled. Ansel didn't wait. He stepped to the left, angling himself between Rune and the gun. Reeve fired. But he'd aimed to the side, a warning. The real trap was the second man, who had slipped in from the floor above. Rune was the first to hear him. The bark that split from his chest wasn't fear, it was fury. He turned and charged not at Reeve, but at the hidden stairwell behind a false panel in the ceiling. His claws found purchase on loose tiles. The ambusher cursed and fell back, startled, unprepared for an 80-pound wall of muscle and instinct. "Go!" Ansel shouted. Rune turned on his heel, barking sharply. A command. He ran toward the back hallway where the fire escape had been welded shut years ago. Ansel followed, Celine behind him, holding the data unit like a flame. They reached the end of the hall. One window remained, boarded up. Rune leapt at it. The boards cracked, splintered, light burst in, and air. They emerged onto a rusted steel platform that hadn't been touched in a decade. Rune hesitated, his first time near that much open air since the fall, but Ansel was right behind him, whispering, "I'm here, with you. It's just wind, not the end." Rune steadied and led them down. 3 flights, no hesitation after the first. At the bottom, they turned into an alley just as 2 shots rang out behind them, embedding into the bricks where Celine had stood seconds before. They ducked into the car, engine ignited. Gone. Back at the safe house, the unit was decrypted within hours. The content was devastating. Live footage of Precinct K9 training fields, audio recordings from handler briefings, real-time footage from inside squad vehicles. One feed showed Sarah Brinks sitting at her desk. Another showed Ansel and Rune sleeping on the floor during one of Rune's recovery days. Someone had planted a transmitter inside Rune's harness during his time at the vet clinic. It had been removed weeks ago, but the signal remained active for a full 10 days, long enough to map their entire behavior. Celine sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes hollow with the weight of what they had uncovered. Rune lay across Ansel's feet, finally sleeping. Ansel placed a hand on his head and whispered, "You brought us home." And Rune, without opening his eyes, thumped his tail once. It took less than 72 hours for the data to burn through the system like a wildfire. Celine delivered it directly into the hands of Captain Ewan Calder, a man with a frame like an oak tree and eyes dulled by too many years behind a desk. He had salt and pepper stubble and a deep scar along his jawline, a remnant from a bar fight in his rookie days that he never bothered to hide. He'd spent the last decade pretending politics didn't wear him down. But when he watched the footage, live surveillance from inside police K9 units, encrypted transmissions detailing patrol routes, candid conversations between handlers and their dogs, his hands shook. "This is war," he muttered. They launched the sting operation before dawn. By mid-morning, federal agents raided 3 buildings across the city and issued arrest warrants for 13 individuals, including a former city council aide and 2 retired tech contractors who had returned under the guise of consultancy. One suspect tried to flee across state lines. Another barricaded himself in a data center beneath a shuttered hotel. Both were caught. At the precinct, Rune watched the news from Ansel's office. Mira had brought her tablet, and while she sat on the couch cross-legged, narrating the footage like a dramatic movie trailer, Rune lay stretched beside her, his head resting on a folded hoodie. Occasionally his ear would twitch at certain words. Handler, unit, dog. But he stayed calm, grounded, as if he knew the storm had passed. Ansel stood nearby, silent as ever, arms crossed. The week had drained him, but there was light in his posture now, a weight lifted. "You're famous," Mira said to Rune, scratching beneath his chin. "You know that, right? They're calling you Sky Warrior on, like, every channel." Rune gave a soft snort and rolled to his side. "Too much fame already," Ansel muttered, but his voice didn't carry annoyance, only a weary fondness. Later that evening, they were called to City Hall. The building was cleaned and polished for the event. Flags hung from polished brass stands, and the marble floors gleamed beneath the waning sun. People filled every seat in the chamber. Officers, reporters, city officials, and a scattering of citizens who had written letters to the precinct since Rune's rescue. Among them were schoolchildren, elderly veterans, and one young boy in a wheelchair clutching a plush German Shepherd toy. Rune walked beside Ansel down the aisle in near silence. He wore no muzzle, no armor, only a dark blue K9 vest, with a silver star stitched at the collar and Mira's scarf tied loosely around his neck. His gait was steady, not proud, not nervous, just sure. At the front of the chamber, beneath a wide seal of the city, Mayor Eliza Trammell stood waiting. She was a statuesque woman in her 50s, with silver blonde hair coiled in a braided crown and a presence that could quiet a storm. Her voice, when she spoke, was equal parts reverence and steel. "Tonight," she said, "we honor not only an act of courage, but the invisible bond that turns instinct into protection, fear into focus, and silence into survival." She turned to Rune. "For your loyalty, for your strength, and for reminding us what it means to rise after a fall, we award you, Officer Rune, with the City of Chicago's Distinguished Service Medal." The chamber erupted in applause. Rune didn't react to the cheers. But when Ansel knelt beside him, whispering something only the dog could hear, Rune pressed his head into the man's chest and stayed there for a long, quiet moment. After the ceremony, the 3 of them, Ansel, Mira, and Rune, drove to a ridge just west of the river where the skyline opened like a fractured mirror of light and glass. It was where Rune had once stood, staring at the Ellison building night after night. Now, that place stood behind them, its top floors boarded up for demolition. They stood in silence, letting the breeze move through them. The sky was burning orange and gold, streaked with the fading warmth of a long-fought day. Mira sat cross-legged on the hood of the car, sketchbook in hand. She was drawing Rune again, but this time, no broken windows, no wires or wind. Just him, standing on the grass, looking forward. Ansel crouched beside Rune. "You know," he murmured, his voice hoarse with something softer than exhaustion, "we did fall. Both of us. You from a window, me from somewhere inside myself." Rune looked at him. "But we didn't crash. We flew. Somehow. We flew." Rune's tail thumped twice against the earth, slow and steady. And as the last light dipped behind the city's bones, Ansel leaned in and whispered, "We fell, but we flew back." And in that golden silence beneath the Chicago sky, the words didn't need to be understood. They were already believed. Sometimes it takes a fall to remind us that we were born to rise. Sometimes it takes the eyes of a dog, steady, loyal, unafraid, to show us what faith really looks like. Rune didn't have words, but his silence spoke louder than speeches. He didn't ask to be a hero. He just held on. And in holding on, he carried not only his own life, but the hearts of those who believed in something greater than fear. This story isn't just about a dog who survived the fall. It's about a miracle that found its way through broken glass. A miracle that whispered, "You are not alone." Whether you call it instinct, destiny, or the hand of God, something greater was watching that day. Maybe it still is, watching over all of us in the quiet moments, in the pain, in the rising. Because sometimes the fall is the beginning of the flight. So, if you're listening tonight, wherever you are, maybe in a hospital room, or a silent house, or a shift that feels never-ending, know this: you are seen, you are needed, and even in your darkest moment, He has not forgotten you. Tell us in the comments, what moment in Rune's journey moved you the most? Do you believe in second chances, in quiet miracles, in the power of love that doesn't speak, but shows? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Every view helps us bring more stories like Rune's to those who need a little light in their day. And tonight, from all of us, we say a prayer for you, your loved ones, and for every silent warrior out there. May God bless you. May He protect your home, and may He remind you that even broken wings can rise again.